a sample or analyze it before they took a man to space.
You would have
surely.
thought so, but I cannot find the evidence to indicate that specific experiments were conducted to determine what levels of radiation existed on the lunar surface.
Why not? I mean,
I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot that is unknown about the whole Apollo program.
okay, so why would they fake the moon landing then?
You have to put the Apollo program, which existed, as most people know, from the mid-1960s through to 1972, when Apollo 17 was the final mission, and President Nixon, as he then pulled the plug on the remaining 3 missions which were due to go off. You have to put it into context of its time.
Yeah.
The height of the Cold War, the space race, which had been going on since April 1961, when Yuri Gagarin was allegedly the first man to orbit the Earth. From that time through until the Apollo program,
Yes.
Russia and the Soviet Union, as it was then, Russia as it is now, the Soviet Union and America were in competition, we were told, the space race. There was also the Cold War. Who could generate the most amount of nuclear power? There was also the Vietnam War, which was getting very ugly. There were the student protests, which were becoming increasingly, causing society to become increasingly polarized. There was a lot going on.
But even with those in place, to fake something this big with a crew of what, 400,000 people working behind the
Yep.
NASA scenes?
Yep.
So who knows what then? I mean, how can you have these all these departments not knowing this one truth which you found out?
Good question. Good question. Now, a lot of people do question the Apollo program, but until most people will say, well, it's just ridiculous. You can't keep a secret with 400,000 people. Well, that's nonsense for a start. Yes, there were 400,000 people working on Apollo, about the same number of people who worked on the Manhattan Project in the early 1940s. That was kept secret pretty well until the bombs went off, in which case you couldn't keep it a secret. In Apollo, yes, there were a lot of people working on the program, but they were compartmentalized. They were working right across the United States, from Washington State to Florida to Texas. They were doing the best job they could. They weren't involved in any
But
nefarious.
surely the data that they saw and they received, be it radio signals and obviously the TV signals, someone must have known something wasn't quite right then.
It's quite possible that they did.
And why haven't they come forward?
They have. A lot of people have come forward. A lot of people have said that there are anomalies.
Who's come forward, for example? Some of the people that worked on these projects, on the Apollo project?
David Percy is one person who has had a connection with NASA. It was suggested that he might check out the Apollo record to see if there were any anomalies.
Sure.
He found many anomalies in it. Brian O'Leary, who was an astronaut, has made statements which indicate that not everything was as we were told.
Right.
You have to remember that NASA is a monolithic, or was then, a monolithic organization.
And
what NASA said went.
And who runs NASA? It's a government agency, isn't it?
It's a government agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It was created by President Eisenhower in October 1958, directly as a result of the Cold War, as it happened, because it was trying to produce the facility to test rockets that were not perceived as military rockets. So it wouldn't spook the Russians or the Soviets. So if you had a civilian organization, which is what NASA became, they could test rockets. They could do the things which the military couldn't do. They could overfly. We'd had Gagarin being launched in 1961.
Was he the first, though?
Gagarin wasn't the first, no. He's the first publicly acknowledged one. He was about the 9th Russian.
The 9th Russian, so there's dead Russian astronauts floating in space.
There are dead Russian astronauts floating in space.
Right, right.
But we don't hear about that, do we?
Have you got any facts to prove this?
Yeah.
Right.
Their conversations with ground control, the Russian ground control in Kazakhstan, were recorded. They were recorded in Italy by 2 Italian brothers.
So they kept that secret to now. So those 2 Italian brothers they recorded what, sorry?
They were recording the transmissions between the Russian spacecraft, which are being launched quite regularly. Not all of them successful. I mean, there's no harm in having accidents. That's what space travel is about. It's a dangerous place.
So you've brought that up. Why? What's the point in bringing the dead astronauts up? Is that so
that we have been lied to from
Yeah,
the beginning
so that's
about
what
the
you're
whole
saying.
space program. That
Okay.
the Russians were not prepared to come up front and say, look, okay, we got it wrong. America did when the Apollo 1
But
craft
how
caught
can
fire.
America lie about the biggest achievement of mankind?
Easily, easily, because they had to be. America don't have the option of coming second to anybody. They had to be seen to be the first.
Right. Are we talking about the American government here? Or again, are we talking about a compartmentalized part of the American government?
The American
Or what?
government is very compartmentalized. Very. There are very, very few people who would have an overall picture of what is going on, especially in a Quango, which is more or less what is
Okay.
quasi-government organization.